Kunal, CK, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time out as always. Let's shift focus and talk about what's happening within the pharma industry. And the pharma industry is now going to become, or all set to become, $100 billion industry. One Pharma steps to boost pharma, increasing market share in pharma. These are all ponderable questions and points. So let's welcome on board Antony Prashant, partner at Deloitte India, to answer some of his observations on what's happening within the pharma basket. Anthony, hi, morning. Good to have you on the show. You've written a recent report about the pharma industry. You say that it has the size and capability to grow up to $100 billion. What is needed to really scale up to that level?
To give you a context before I get into the details of how we would reach this 100 billion, if you look at the global pharma industry, it's around 1.3 trillion US dollars, and within that, generics is around $270 billion, and India accounts for 3% of the global pharma sector, which is at 40 billion today. And we are a very large exporting organization. Close to 19-20 billion of our industry's output is exported, and 40% of the export is predominantly going to the US and some to UK and other countries like South Africa. Now, if you look at the patents that would expire over the next 4 to 5 years, roughly around $200 billion of generics would be coming into the market, which therefore makes the global generics market move from 270 billion to 450 billion. And that's a significant opportunity for the India market because we are a large exporting industry. Now, if you look at accelerating the journey, and when we are at 11% of the generics market, and given our exposure to exports, and if we accelerate the journey to at least achieve 17% of the demand, then there is significant opportunity for us to, at least for the formulation business of 30 billion going to 75 billion. And on top of that, if you bring in biosimilars or biologics, you add another 10 billion. And then, we also export APIs, which will add another 8 to 10 billion. So there is a clear path for us to reach this 100 billion, primarily because of we play in the generics market and the number of patents that are going to expire in the next 4 to 5 years, the size that is now going to be available for the Indian industry.
Sure. India is called the pharmacy of the world, literally. How is it that you think we can increase the Indian market share in the global pharma industry? Will one need to invest more in various platforms like complex drugs, biotechs, etc., to try and scale up the market share?
Look, let me put it this way. How do we achieve this? Like you asked, how do you achieve this 100 billion mark? And again, before I put in what strategy we should adopt into perspective, if you look at what our industry has been predominantly excelling is in manufacturing low-cost generic drugs. And recently, the large Indian pharma companies have been focusing on diversifying. They're moving into injectables, biosimilars, and other specialty products as well. And even from an infrastructure perspective, outside the US, the largest number of US FDA-approved sites are in India. And that's a big advantage for the industry. And also, if you take the industry in perspective, there is a significant concentration among the companies. 25 companies contribute to 85% of the total industry output. And there is a long tail. There's a significant dispersion. There are around 3,000 pharma companies in India, which range from 10 crores to 100 crores, and of course, varying size. Therefore, this would involve a two-pronged strategy for us to achieve this 100 billion mark. One is, how do we enable the medium and the large Indian pharma companies to accelerate the growth and to cater to the demand that is going to come in the next 4 to 5 years. And the second part is, how do we attract the top 20 global companies into India to set up operations here? And again, here, if you look at, there's a big concentration. We spoke about the size of the industry, 1.3 trillion, and 20 global companies contribute to roughly 650 billion. So but their presence in India is very limited. So how do we bring those companies into India looking at India for India and India for global. So that's the strategy that we need to.
So, Antony, the likes of the MNCs, GSK, Pfizer, Novartis, they've been here for many years. Are you now suggesting that we should invite them to manufacture for exports in India?
For exports, yes, because our domestic market is today around 18 billion, and as it grows, it could reach anywhere between 25 to 30 billion. But the larger opportunity is there in the exports out of that 100 billion. So how do they? And that's where, right, which is where we need to look at the larger ecosystem that we have. For example, how do we look at creating clusters or industrial parks where you have plug and play facilities for manufacturing at a global scale? How do we simplify regulatory mechanisms, set up the quality standards at par with the global best practices, and also create very transparent fiscal support mechanisms? When I spoke about this 3,000 pharma companies which are in the the small and medium segment, we need to look at setting up this one pharma platform where we will use technology for consolidating sourcing, supply chain, regulatory quality approvals. And the intent is how do we aggregate all these discrete capacities that are available to individual companies and enable collaboration and alliances with large global and domestic pharma companies. And we have seen that happen in the recent past, right? In the context of COVID, we saw a lot of global companies looking at India for in licensing and a lot of agreements that were signed up. So it could either be using this ecosystem that is available for setting up operations in India and looking at the India manufacturing ecosystem for global opportunities as well. But we should be, but also we should keep in mind this would involve setting up regulatory standards which would enable global companies consider these small and medium enterprises on that one pharma platform for strategic partnerships, JVs, or looking at any contract manufacturing operations.
So, how important is it to incentivize R&D across the board? What are some of the hurdles for R&D in the complex drugs, for biotech as well currently?
Put it in this manner. For example, when we spoke about building meeting the 100 billion mark, and where is our competitiveness, and to enable those competitiveness, what are some of the building blocks? So if you look at if you look at the building blocks for being competitive as well as meeting this 100 billion mark, one of the big enablers is going to be the R&D capability. So for example, if you look at the biologic segment in India, it's relatively small. We are of the 40 billion, our output is close to $2.5 billion. And one of the key barriers for Indian companies in increasing their presence in the biopharma segment is the high cost of development. To develop a biosimilar, the cost ranges from 100 to 150 million dollars. And when I say a biosimilar, it's not the real biologics; it's the generics equivalent of when you have a patented drug, and when the patent goes away, it becomes a generics. The similarity when applied to a biologics, when the biologics patent expires, it becomes a biosimilar. Now, it costs anywhere between 100 and 150 million dollars to develop this biosimilar. And additionally, if you look at all the clinical research initiatives on innovative products by companies as well as CROs, they need to comply with multiple DGCI regulations and queries, and therefore making the approval process complex and time consuming. And that's where we have to be spending more time from an R&D capability. And every year, regulatory agencies are granting approvals as well for various similar biologics for the treatments of multiple diseases. And if we have to achieve true potential and become a global leader, we need to bring in enabling policies for driving R&D in India for both the Indian and global companies that we are looking at. And the talent pool is available in India, and also the existing infrastructure will support it. For example, we spoke about the largest number of FDA sites out of the US, and there is a large domestic market that should enable this. And also the focus should be is how do we develop biosimilars at a very low cost so that we still remain competitive in the global market. Because if we find that many large markets are moving towards generics, then it becomes a very commoditized product. So we need to build strong capability to enable create biosimilars at a much lower cost. If we are able to create biosimilars at the cost of generics, that will be a big competitive advantage for India.
All right. Now, a lot of recent incentives have also come in for the API segment. Do you think that perhaps Indian pharma needs to be more backward integrated than before?
Very good question, because one of the dimensions that most of the pharma companies have embarked on today is on building resilience in the supply chain, especially in making the APIs, or more than APIs, the input materials for manufacturing the APIs, what we call as the key starting materials or the intermediates. And the reason why the new schemes that have come up is to be cost competitive with China. And the advantage that China has is, see, if you take an API facility, the biggest cost element is the effluent treatment plant and the common utilities. So China has set up a lot of huge bulk parks where all these facilities are made available to companies, and therefore they become cost competitive. And at the same time, more when you start looking at larger volumes, the utilization of assets goes up, and therefore the cost as well come down. And also one thing, the local Chinese market itself is very big. For the domestic consumption in China itself is 100 billion, 100 and 120 billion. Whereas India is roughly around 20 billion. They are 6 times the domestic consumption of India. Now, in order to ensure that we are cost competitive as well as being resilient, so the question therefore companies have started answering now is, do we look at cost arbitrage, or we look at disruption arbitrage, right? So how do we ensure that we have steady supplies of APIs and at the same time we are cost competitive? So and also if you look at the 373 essential drugs, 200 of them are imported from China. And this is where we need to start looking at the multiple schemes that the government has launched. So government has now come up with 2 schemes for pharma. One is the PLI scheme, where if you are able to, what the scheme talks about is it gives some financial incentives based on sales made by selected manufacturers for 41 products, which covers around 53 APIs. And the incentive ranges from 5 to 20% based on the incremental sales. So that's going to help companies in terms of bridging the gap between the Chinese prices and the India price to some extent. But obviously, there would be some APIs where we may not be able to meet the price competitiveness. But at least this helps the Indian companies to source APIs from Indian manufacturers, because we have a large ecosystem in India. For example, if you take a drug like gabapentin, we have the capacity which is 3 times the demand, but we still import that API from China. So therefore, we have the capacities. Now, how do we ensure that we leverage those capacities, build in efficiencies, improve asset utilizations, and at the same time, build in resilience into the industry? And the second scheme which the government is now has also come up, which is the bulk drug park, and this scheme is primarily is to provide easy access to world-class common infrastructure facilities, and which will be located in these parks where companies can come set up and make use of these common infrastructure facilities. And this is again for a period of 5 years. So because we need to build resilience, I think the government has come up with these schemes, which should help bridge the price gap between China and India to some extent.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us, Antony.